A majestic white-tailed deer was hung up by a man. He cut some meat from the deer and roasted it on a stick. The tender roasted meat was captivating. This free-spirited life unfolded in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Before dawn, Eustace got up early. Autumn hunting is an annual important ritual. All his food came from nature, including fresh meat. Today, his target was a deer, and the first light was usually the best time to spot one. He sat down with his back against a large tree, a good spot with a clear view, ideal for waiting. As time passed, Eustace had been sitting for hours, but unfortunately, he hadn't seen any deer. He then made an important decision to move to another area. Due to the deer's high alertness, he had to move slowly and use the big trees for cover, being cautious with every step. Hunting is a test of patience. Soon, he noticed signs of a deer's activity, the way a buck marks its territory. Eustace hid behind a large tree, waiting for the buck to appear. Before long, a deer came into view. Eustace watched its every move and prepared his gun. When the deer moved into an open area, he decisively shot. The buck tried to flee but staggered from the gunshot. For humanitarian reasons, Eustace fired another shot. The buck fell instantly. After waiting a while and seeing no movement, Eustace slowly approached. Instead of seeing the deer at first, he found blood trails. Following these, he found the buck already on the ground. Holding the antlers, he admired them closely. The deer was too beautiful. Eustace thanked it for its sacrifice. Back home, he hung the deer up and began to cut along the neck to skin it. Soon he had completely skinned the deer and draped the hide over a nearby wooden bench. Then he began to butcher the deer, placing the parts on the deerskin. He cut tenderloin from the deer, preparing it for dinner. Eustace roasted a piece of meat over the fire. Once cooked, he savored it with squinted eyes, enjoying the familiar taste that always felt heavenly. This was the simple and blissful rural life. The shredder is spinning wildly. A bearded man grimly stuffs small objects into the machine. The output is a mess of bloody flesh, which are actually little mice, used as fishing bait to be sent across the country. This takes place in Montana's Salish Mountains. Hunter Paul moved here 6 years ago and began his mountain life. He rents this homestead with the goal of saving to buy the land. To gather the down payment, he works very hard. Today, a distinguished guest visits his home. Old Hunter Tom, a wise sage of the region with vast hunting and leather tanning experience, is also a helpful elder. He brought a pine marten trap to teach the young man. Paul is thrilled with this valuable trapping technique. They head to the eastern woods to find a spot for the trap. Pine martens, popular for their soft fur, come from the far north. Quickly, Tom selects a sloping tree, hangs a trapping box on it, places beaver meat at the bottom, and sets a trap at the entrance. Paul started hunting at age 10 and became passionate about it. He dedicates his life to the mountains. Now, at a crucial moment, Tom lights a piece of deerskin with a lighter. The scent of the burnt fur travels far, attracting the pine marten. Paul is immensely impressed. After bidding farewell to Tom, Paul returns to his busy work. The trapping season has begun, and he hopes to make a significant profit this year. First, he boils all the traps to remove human scent. He has an old boiler, but needs another as it cannot accommodate all the traps. He cuts a door in the middle of a drum and an octagon at the back, welds 2 drums together, installs a chimney, and completes a boiler for boiling water. The boiling mixture includes some wood dye, which removes rust and human scent. As the fire grows, the mixture boils. Paul places each trap in the boiling water. Excited for the new season, he is one of many living a simple, rich mountain life in Montana's Tobacco Root Mountains. It's late autumn, and Hunter Jake sets out on a hunting trip. With winter approaching, he will protect the ranch from mountain lions and wolves coming down the hills. His goal today is to stockpile food for winter, targeting a white-tailed deer. Last winter, he and his girlfriend Annika made a grand plan. Her family funded their purchase of a piece of land where they built a homestead. They held a wedding there in the summer. To provide for the family, Jake needed to work much harder. In Montana, there are still 7 weeks until the rifle hunting season, and it is currently the archery season. Since there has been a meat shortage at home for half a month, Jake has no choice but to take a risk. The disadvantage of archery is that he must get close to the target. Wounded prey can become aggressive, and their final counterattacks can be deadly. After some searching, Jake finally spotted 2 deer about 1,000 yards away. Due to the deer's high alertness to maintain silence, Jake opted for light gear and used a haystack as cover. He could now clearly see the deer's head, but the distance was still a bit far. However, at this point, Jake had to try hunting. He slowly approached the fence, pulling the bowstring and imitating a sheep's bleat, hoping the deer would stand up. But the deer, either deaf or foolish, just stared blankly at Jake without the wariness typical of prey. As Jake's arms grew sore, the deer finally stood up belatedly. Due to the pain in his arms, Jake missed his shot by a wide margin. Watching the deer flee, Jake could only curse in frustration. He followed them into the woods. Bows are not suited for open areas but excel in small forests. Following tracks on the ground, Jake quickly found an animal trail. By staying here, he was sure to encounter deer. He constructed a hideout from some trees and settled in to wait. As evening approached, several deer appeared. Jake calmly selected his target, and upon noticing a doe that seemed aware of him, they locked eyes. Jake thought, "It's you." He stood, aimed, and decisively released the arrow. It seemed to hit the target, but the deer quickly ran away. Jake moved forward to check and found some blood traces on the ground. He had indeed hit his target. Now, he needed to track the deer. Night would soon fall in the mountains, leaving him little time. As he progressed, he saw more blood traces. The deer might have fallen somewhere, and with night being the time when predators are active, Jake was very worried that his deer could be stolen. Moreover, a river ahead had washed away all traces. Jake tried searching the opposite bank. Perhaps mercifully, after some time, he again saw blood traces, and not far ahead, the deer lay dead, no longer breathing. After a busy day, Jake was tired but had no time to rest. Only by safely bringing the meat home could he consider his task complete. After removing the entrails, he hoisted the deer with difficulty and started his journey back. Although tough, the effort was worth it. For the next 2 months, they wouldn't have to worry about food. Jake had hunted a white-tailed deer, obtaining hundreds of pounds of meat. However, since settling down, his appetite had grown for unknown reasons, and his meat consumption had dramatically increased. So, after many days, he and Annika set out to hunt David's deer. It was Annika's first time participating in a big hunt. She was nervous, yet excited. As a veterinarian, her job was to save animals, but hunting was about ending lives, creating a strange feeling for her. David's deer are 3 times the size of regular deer and often live in remote mountain areas. Tracking them requires patience and luck. First, they built a camp for the night in an open area, cleared the snow, and quickly set up a tent with prepared materials. Then they patrolled the area, trying to spot David's deer. For better observation, they climbed a high slope, took out binoculars, and started scanning from above. Jake, an experienced hunter, soon spotted David's deer and pointed them out to Annika. They didn't act rashly, as David's deer move quickly and are best tracked when settled. After observing for a while, Jake confirmed the deer had stopped and it was time to start the chase. They descended the hill briskly, entering an open area, but stopped because David's deer are very alert, and walking boldly could startle them. They also heard competing coyotes nearby. Following the sounds, they saw an adult coyote. At this point, whether they could approach the deer smoothly was up to fate. But soon, Jake stopped again. From the deer prints on the ground, he deduced the deer had been driven forward by the coyote, and the coyote's hunt was not yet over. Indeed, 5 miles away, the deer moved again. Clearly, it was no longer suitable for hunting, and they returned disheartened. On the road, Jake suddenly pulled Annika down because there was another herd of deer hidden in a dip ahead. They chose to crawl forward, and, once close enough, began preparing to shoot. The deer lay there quietly, but Annika hesitated to fire due to the strong wind shaking her confidence. With Jake's patient guidance, Annika finally pulled the trigger. The gunshot scared the deer away, but one of the David's deer fell, having been hit. They approached to check the target. It was a mature David's deer weighing over 600 pounds, enough to provide meat for at least 3 months. They quickly butchered the deer with sharp knives, packing the main parts categorically. Soon they completed the task and headed back to camp with backpacks full of deer meat. As night fell, a bright fire lit up. After a busy day, both were famished. Jake started preparing dinner using the fresh tender loin, the best part of the meat. He sliced it and grilled it over the fire, soon filling the air with a delicious aroma. Annika picked up a piece, blew on it, and put it in her mouth. The hot meat nearly burned her tongue, but the flavor instantly won her over, and she chewed eagerly. Jake also expressed great satisfaction. Such delicacies are rare in this world. They enjoyed their meal while chatting and laughing, with Annika very pleased with this married life, thinking marrying Jake was the right choice. In Washington, wolves were nearly extinct until their numbers began to rebound after 2008. Today, they are active in every corner of the mountains. If a pack of wolves is hunting David's deer, the herd keeps moving, which is bad news for Hunter Ray. Today, however, he is in luck. After a brief stare down with a David's deer, Ray quickly raised his rifle as the deer prepared to leave. Because bushes blocked his view and he didn't want to startle the deer, he lowered his rifle. He didn't give up and continued to follow the deer as the snow fell heavily. Fortunately, he caught up with the herd and aimed his rifle just as a David's deer looked his way. Ray fired decisively. When he reached the spot where the deer had stood, only some fur was left in the snow. Following the tracks, Ray finally found the deer lying down the slope. Breathing heavily, he felt a surge of excitement. He patted the David's deer, hoping it would understand, then quickly sliced open its belly with a sharp knife, removed the hot heart to cool in the snow, and left the rest of the organs to nature. He then butchered the deer, packed the meat by type, and wrapped the head in its hide. Now he had to move the meat to a safe location. By nightfall, Ray had finished processing everything. He built a fire and grilled the deer heart for dinner. After a long day, he was very hungry. He grabbed the deer heart and bit into it, thoroughly enjoying the taste. Meanwhile, in the far north at Iliamna Lake, it was late autumn. Aaron was making final preparations for the coming winter. Yesterday, he transported 700 pounds of supplies from the town to his current location, but his destination was still 20 miles away. This part of the journey was the most challenging, filled with swamps and steep hills. Aaron set off, racing against time, because once heavy snow falls, the roads will close completely. The fishing cabin by Iliamna Lake, where he and his wife have lived for 6 years, will be isolated from the world until spring. Despite the many times he has traveled this road, it still gives him a headache. The rugged mountain road constantly shakes the vehicle, and fallen trees frequently block the path. Luckily, he carries a chainsaw in the vehicle to clear the way. Meanwhile, at their 5-acre fishing cabin, Jenny was tending to the livestock. The yard housed many chickens, and their eggs were an important part of their diet. To prevent the chickens from freezing in winter, she added wood shavings to the coop for insulation. Additionally, they kept several hunting dogs that helped with hunting and guarded the home. Jenny had once been a search and rescue medic, but the competitive pressure of city life was too overwhelming. This led the couple to choose a rural lifestyle. Despite being busy, they found each day fulfilling. Back to Aaron, he was still navigating the rugged mountain roads. Thanks to the high clearance of their off-road vehicle, he could manage the rough terrain and eventually reached the lakeside safely. The rest of the journey required a barge, next to which a yacht was moored. Aaron went back to get help. Soon, he and his wife arrived with the barge and hurried to transport their supplies home before dark. Aaron loaded the vehicle and supplies onto the barge, and they set off. Due to shallow waters near the shore, the barge was somewhat submerged, forcing them to push it along with planks. By the time night fell completely, they had managed to move past the difficulty. The rest of the journey went smoothly, taking only about 10 minutes to reach their base camp. At that moment, Aaron could finally relax. Despite the upcoming long and harsh winter, they were prepared. Ray had hunted a David's deer, obtaining 660 pounds of meat. He spent the night in the wilderness. The next day, as dawn broke, Ray woke from sleep. He sighed at how long and cold the night had been. After a brief rest, he got busy. Today, he needed to safely transport the deer meat. To facilitate carrying, he decided to make a sled. He cut 2 similarly sized saplings for the sled's support poles, gathered some pine branches, and cut a few logs for crossbeams. He then assembled them. This type of zip tie was particularly handy. Ray, not a native mountain man, knew to modernize hunting practices, often using modern tools to increase efficiency. Before long, he had finished making the sled. Then, he loaded all the deer meat onto the sled, securing it tightly, and started off. pushing against the sled's crossbar with his waist. The journey back to his vehicle was about 5 miles, a real test of his stamina. The thick snow provided a surface for the sled to slide on, but also posed challenges. Ray took uneven steps. While momentum made pulling the sled easier, the deep snow made walking difficult. Restarting the sled once stopped was nearly impossible. Ray gasped for air, constantly pushing his physical limits while trying to move forward step by step. However, his stamina inevitably reached its limit. Finally, Ray stopped to catch his breath. After regaining his composure, he set off again. At that moment, he felt like a black ox, pulling a cart through unknown territories, bearing the weight of his load. The hardships kept coming, but with great effort, he managed to drag the sled up to the mountaintop. The journey downhill was next, and while he had hoped for relief, the descent proved challenging due to its momentum. Ray had to run passively, but fortunately, no accidents occurred. Exhausted, he was relieved to see his off-road vehicle ahead. He felt a transition from hell to heaven as he transferred all the meat to the vehicle and began the journey home. Soon after arriving, Ray carried the meat inside. Despite his exhaustion, the work was far from over. He needed to preserve the meat, key for surviving the winter. As a hunting guide, Ray respected every animal he killed, and utilizing every piece of meat was a form of high reverence. Salting the meat is an ancient tradition. Salt removes moisture from the meat and prevents parasites. Ray first poured salt at the bottom of a barrel, placed a piece of meat on it, then added another layer of salt, and repeated the process with more meat. Once the barrel was nearly full, he prepared brine. He boiled the brine and poured it into the barrel to cover all the meat. Next, he turned to the deer skin, using salt to remove moisture, a method for preserving the fur. He then processed the deer's head, which has some artistic value. First, he skinned it, separated the jawbones, and collected brain material, essential for tanning leather. Afterward, he cooked the skull to separate the meat perfectly, adding sodium carbonate to whiten the bones. The boiling process lasted several hours. As time ticked by, Ray felt it was time to finish. He removed the skull, cleaned off the remaining meat scraps, and placed the loose teeth on the table. Ray thoroughly enjoyed this lifestyle, filled with challenges and surprises every day. In Montana's Bison Valley, Tom is set to teach his young apprentice today. Hank, the 10-year-old son of Tom's apprentice Sean, has developed a keen interest in outdoor life, much to Tom's delight. Tom is prepared to pass on all his knowledge. Today's lesson revolves around a fresh deer hide, teaching Hank the methods of leather tanning. Tom presents a finished piece to let Hank feel its soft texture, sparking his interest. After a brief explanation of the process, Tom takes out a scraper made from a steel blade bound to a deer's antler. With gentle scrapes, the hair comes off smoothly, accompanied by crisp sounds. Hank watches intently as the hair continuously falls. Once Hank is familiar with the process, Tom hands him another scraper to try it himself. In a pleasant atmosphere, the two continuously scrape the hide. After a while, the fur is almost completely removed, and Tom trims the edges with scissors. The skin is now rough and stiff and needs softening. Tom pours a bucket of water over the skin, preparing to soak it. They then break for lunch. Post-lunch, they return to the workshop, retrieve the deer hide from the water, and take it outside to drape over a wooden frame. Tom scrapes off the remaining fat to further clean it. Next, he soaks the hide in a tanning solution made from buffalo brain matter and hot water, containing enzymes that break down the skin tissue, making it soft. After soaking for 10 minutes, Tom hangs the hide on a pole and twists it to squeeze out the water. Back in the workshop, they make the leather even softer by pulling and stretching it. Because deer hide consists of fine, hair-like fibers, stretching alters the fiber structure, achieving the desired softness. Hank wants to join in and takes over Tom's task, busily working away. Tom watches amusedly, but soon Hank tires and Tom takes over again. After more stretching, the deer hide feels as soft as a blanket. Hank is amazed by the transformation and gains a deep admiration for Tom, like an endless river. He will remember this fascinating day. In Montana's Bison Valley, a bearded man with a sharp knife takes a swipe at a badger's rear. This is the Salish Mountains of Montana. Paul is a hunter, hired by a ranch owner to help clear out predators that trouble the ranch, including this badger. Unlike nomadic tribes, badgers don't have fixed territories and constantly move. digging many burrows wherever they go. This can cause horses to trip, potentially resulting in broken legs or severe injuries. Thus, badgers are a primary enemy on the ranch. Paul's task allows him to earn a double income since badger fur can be sold. To perform better, he enlists an assistant, his son, Chauncey, a 20-year-old with a stylish beard who fell in love with hunting after moving to the countryside 3 years ago. The thrill of the hunt captivates him. Once prepared, the two set out. Badgers are tricky to catch not because they are clever, but because they are nomadic. Spotting their burrows is a matter of luck. While on the hunt, Paul and Chauncey stop at several holes that appear to be badger entrances. After careful inspection, Paul confirms these are indeed badger burrows but are abandoned. They continue and soon find several fresh burrows with clear paw prints, ideal for setting traps. Nearby, Paul finds a mouse hole and digs a pit at its entrance to bury a trap. Before placing the trap, he lays some wax sand underneath to absorb moisture and prevent the trap from freezing. However, wax sand can clog the trap, so Paul covers it with a sheet of paper followed by more sand until the trap is concealed. To ensure it looks natural, he sprinkles ordinary sand on top. The success of the trap also depends on bait made from mouse meat, which also attracts badgers. Now they are ready to set up other traps. Soon after, they found another badger burrow with a collapsed entrance. Chauncey was disappointed, but Paul chuckled. He explained to his son that the burrow was sealed by a badger sleeping inside as a form of protection. This time, Chauncey was in charge of setting the trap. He dug 2 pits nearby, planning to use a dual bait strategy to ensure at least one would attract the badger. Paul went to get the bait from the car. Just then, an accident occurred. Chauncey accidentally triggered a trap, snapping it shut on his hand. He yelled in pain. Fortunately, he was wearing thick gloves, which prevented a fracture. After calming down, he continued setting up the trap, this time with extra caution. Paul guided him through the next steps. Once they covered the trap with soil evenly, the first trap was set. In total, they set up 10 traps, including conibear traps. After laying a wide net of traps, they went home to wait. The next day, they checked the traps amid light snowfall as winter set in. Unfortunately, the first few traps were empty. They moved on and finally noticed a change at the next trap, which had been triggered. Paul used a shovel to widen the entrance while Chauncey pulled out a badger using the chain. Encouraged, they joyfully moved to the next location, which also brought a surprise: a female badger. Catching 2 female badgers today meant fewer badger litters next year, a significant impact. Elated, they went to report the good news to the ranch owner and collect their reward. On the other side, winter had arrived at Illiuk Lake, bringing threats from predators. Last night, they lost 2 dogs. Just when they were heartbroken, the dogs returned in the morning. Recently, wolf howls have been frequent, luring their dogs away. Gray wolves were once nearly hunted to extinction, so local protection policies were implemented. Today, the gray wolf population has rebounded, now posing a threat to ecological balance. To ensure safety, Aaron planned to build flash bombs with tripwires. He is an off-road mechanic with a well-stocked warehouse. The design of the flash bombs relies on a chain reaction. When a wolf trips the wire, it pulls a pin, releasing the firing pin of a shotgun, triggering an explosion to scare off the wolves. The critical component is the ammunition, a 12-gauge shell cut at the bottom. Then, a plastic plug is cut and inserted into the shell. After assembling the chamber, it was time to test it. Aaron gently pulled the string, and with a gunshot, the bullet swiftly ejected, looking formidable. Equipped, Aaron entered the woods, tying one end of the fishing line to a fallen tree and the other to a standing tree. He installed the firing device on this tree and threaded the fishing line through a hole, gently tying it to the launcher, then installed the bullet at the front of the device. Meanwhile, Jenny was splitting wood vigorously. Despite being a woman, her robust demeanor matched any man. Splitting wood was to build a bonfire, the best way to drive away wolves. When Aaron returned, having both completed their tasks, they shared an unexpected kiss, happy with their completed wolf defense setup. However, waiting passively wasn't Aaron's style. He rode his snowmobile to look for wolf tracks. After crossing the lake, he entered the dense forest on the opposite shore. There was a small path convenient for the snowmobile, but soon a fallen tree blocked the way. Clear wolf tracks in the snow indicated the correct direction. Aaron cleared a new path and continued forward. After a while, he stopped. The wolf tracks led into a chaotic area. Next, Aaron could only proceed on foot. Carrying a shotgun and holding an axe, he resolutely walked on. Following these traces, he found a kill site, seemingly a coyote that had hidden here to avoid the wolves, but unfortunately, it had met its end. Aaron worried about his wife's safety and started his journey back. A terrifying wolf howl was heard, followed by the sound of a flash bomb. It seemed a wolf had triggered the tripwire. After reuniting with his wife at home, they both armed themselves and entered the forest. They quickly reached the scene where they found wolf tracks in the snow, but the wolves had disappeared. Aaron repaired the alarm device and then adjusted the wood by the fire to burn better. Then they returned home. This is their unpredictable yet thrilling life, outdoors. Jake and his wife Annika hunted a David's deer, gaining nearly 300 pounds of meat. It was Annika's first time hunting a large animal, which left her very satisfied, though Jake felt somewhat unfulfilled. The next day, he stepped out of the tent, looked at his wife's catch, and decided to hunt on his own. They planned to climb to a highland to look for game. Understanding her competitive new husband, Annika happily followed him. Soon, they reached the summit and started scanning the surroundings. Jake, an experienced hunter, surveyed the area expertly, but saw nothing. It was Annika, the novice, who spotted the prey. Following her direction, Jake finally saw a sizable group of David's deer grazing. They quickly followed to keep the deer from moving. When they reached the base of the hill, they stopped to avoid startling the deer. Jake tracked the prey alone while Annika stayed back, observing through binoculars. The wind was in their favor, preventing the deer from smelling their presence. Jake, taking advantage of the favorable conditions, got within rifle range. He put earplugs in and approached slowly. The deer, sensing danger, stood up. In that moment, Jake set up his rifle within 3 seconds. Annika watched nervously as the deer began to panic. Jake fired, and with a loud bang, a David's deer fell while the others ran off. Jake aimed, considering a second shot, but seeing the deer motionless, he knew the hunt was successful. Annika joyfully approached, and they both inspected the prey, a mature doe. With today's catch, Jake had hunted 2 David's deer and 1 white-tailed deer, securing ample food for the winter. As the saying goes, men and women working together makes the task easier. The couple quickly dismembered the David's deer, and each carried 100 pounds of meat to start their journey back. The sight of them working in harmony was very peaceful. By evening, they were still on the road because the hunting spot was quite far from their truck, and the heavy load significantly slowed their pace. Annika, tired in body and mind, felt unsteady on her feet. Just when they felt completely exhausted, they finally saw their truck. They made a final effort to reach it and leaned against it, wishing they could just stay there. Unfortunately, they couldn't rest just yet as another David's deer awaited transportation at the camp. After a brief rest, they hit the road again. Despite their fatigue, they experienced what could be called joyful suffering as they talked lovingly and pushed forward. They made it back to the truck just before dark, concluding a very successful hunting trip. Elated, the pair headed home. A few days later, Jake finally had his first business of the year. As a lion hunter, he was responsible for driving off mountain lions that wandered into ranches. Several days of heavy snowfall had made it difficult for the mountain lions to find prey, leading them to come down to the ranches. Soon, Jake spotted a trail of lion tracks in the snow. From the footprints, it was clear that it was a mature mountain lion, a challenging adversary. But Jake was well prepared today, bringing along 5 experienced hunting dogs. They quickly chased after the lion in one direction, while Jake followed slowly behind. The deep snow made his movements difficult, and he struggled to keep up. After 2 hours, which was usually enough time to near his target, he realized he was far behind. Feeling exhausted, he took a break and checked his GPS, discovering that the dogs had stopped at a certain spot, seemingly having cornered the mountain lion. To avoid any mishaps, Jake needed to get there as quickly as possible. Inspired, he found new energy and strode forward. After a while, he finally heard the dogs barking triumphantly. Overjoyed, he hurried toward them. But soon, he stopped as the barking abruptly ceased. He checked his GPS and saw that the dogs were on the move again. likely because the mountain lion had jumped down from a tree and chosen to flee again. Jake was very concerned about the safety of his hunting dogs. Without his command, they would not stop the hunt, and climbing higher posed greater risks. Prolonged tracking could exhaust the dogs. It wasn't long before he reached the spot where the dogs had been standing. The ground beneath the tree was covered with chaotic footprints, and claw marks from the mountain lion were visible on the tree trunk. Just then he heard a burst of urgent barking from a distance, indicating that they had cornered the mountain lion again. Jake needed to hurry over. They were now far enough from the ranch, and the chase had been going on for 4 hours. It was time to end it. Catching up as fast as he could, Jake finally saw the mountain lion trembling in a tree, with several fierce hunting dogs standing below. Jake was very pleased with their performance. The mountain lion looked distressed, likely leaving a lasting impression that would deter it from coming down the mountain anytime soon. This was exactly Jake's goal. The day's task of driving the mountain lion away was perfectly accomplished. It was time for him and his dogs to head home and enjoy their dinner.